Welcome to the Beau Show. There was a tragic and horrific shooting that occurred in Uvalde, Texas last week. And I can't avoid talking about it because it dominates so much of the conversation right now. You've already heard the gun control conversation kick up again, and knee-jerk jumps to conclusions and legislative moves. Questions arise such as, how did he get the gun? Where did he come from? Was he mentally ill? Why did no one say anything? How was it so easy to get inside that school? Why did it take police so long? And why did he post on social media and no one did anything about it? To break down any shooting and loss of life is difficult to do. Nothing will ever bring back those kids and those teachers. Evil exists in many forms. So rather than politicizing this tragedy, which many are quick to do, I want to look at all the things that happened leading up to it and what steps were taken or not taken that potentially could have avoided this disaster, and what solutions might be possible in the future. We have to look for solutions, but we can only do that by looking through the lens of the past. And the answer is not to confirm our own biases about what we think should happen. For instance, if you're anti-gun, you'll scream that all guns should be banned. And if you're a Second Amendment person, you'll immediately look to the shooter's mental health, maybe even their identity, to find a motive. So let's go in with a clean slate and no preconceived notions. The victims deserve that. Firstly, America, for whatever reason, is a violent place. It started with colonial America and wars with natives. The Europeans jockeyed for land in the New World, and conquest was the answer. But the colonials hated their European counterparts for keeping all the spoils and not permitting self-governance. So they started the American Revolution, which was to take up arms against the government. Shockingly, they won, and thus America was born. It was out of necessity that they went to war. To think of doing that today seems unfathomable. But just because America became independent did not mean the wars stopped. The War of 1812, the Spanish-American War, and the Civil War, the bloodiest of all, followed. America fought with itself. It ripped apart this nation at its seams, brother against brother, a mother with no sons left. A nation was divided and bereft, yet we still came together, albeit slowly. America was a heterogeneous blend of cultures and ethnicities, and some hated each other. The Italians, the Irish, the Mexicans, and now in modern day, gangs dominate this territorial war. The rise of death by gun came in the form of the drug wars and gang wars. And while to many it seems like gun deaths are widespread and rampant, it's also important to make the distinction between guns used for homicide and suicide. For instance, in 2015, gun suicides killed 22,000 people. Homicides killed 13,000 people, and mass shootings killed 43. Now, while mass shootings do not account for most deaths, the cost and the pain are no less severe. A death is a death, even when it kills children, especially those at school, which should be the greatest safe space in America. We really feel the pain then. Small Arms Survey, a Swiss-based research group, estimated in 2018 that there are approximately 390 million guns in circulation in the US. That, of course, is just an estimate. The issue when gun control comes up is, what will happen to all the guns currently already in circulation, even if all the guns were banned? I think it's a logical question, because one of the problems we have is not just the legal purchase of firearms, but the ability to get them easily without going the legal route. That could be something as simple as knowing where a gun is hidden in a house, for instance. However, when it does come to the legal purchase of a gun, there are governing laws meant to keep them out of the hands of those that would do bodily harm. For instance, you fill out an application, there are background checks, they'll certainly look at your record, see if you have any bad police record, and in some cases there may even be a several-day cooling period or a permit required. Salvador Ramos, the shooter who killed 19 children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary, was able to purchase 2 long AR-15 style rifles shortly after his 18th birthday in Uvalde, Texas. Federal law prohibits purchasing a handgun until a person is 21, but it did not preclude him from buying these rifles at age 18. Some states have changed those laws to increase the age to 21, such as Florida, Washington, Vermont, California, Illinois, and Hawaii. And I think it's worth noting the age of the mass shooters, because the Parkland shooter and now Salvador Ramos were both under 21. The recent Buffalo shooter was also 18 years old. The government's argument is that 18 to 21-year-olds are more likely to engage in risky, emotional, impulsive behavior. When the Florida law was enacted, the National Rifle Association appealed, but so far has lost. A federal court struck down California's version of that law as unconstitutional. So, you see, in this conversation, there has to be a diligent consideration of Second Amendment rights balanced with all the other parameters that might make a mass shooting all too easy. So the first question we should be asking is, did Ramos legally purchase these rifles, considering the process that one must go through to get them? He purchased these rifles on May 17th and May 20th from a federally authorized dealer. Because he was just turning 18, it was the very first thing he did for his birthday. Where the money came from to buy these rifles and ammo is not known. But I do think it's an important piece of the puzzle. You can't just start at the purchase. You have to know how the money was acquired, since these are not cheap guns. Ramos proudly displayed these guns on his Instagram account. Ramos first shot his grandmother and fled the scene. He then crashed a car outside of Robb Elementary School and emerged with his weapon and entered the school through a door that had been propped open. Two men at a nearby funeral home saw the crash and tried to investigate it, but retreated when Ramos fired at them. Police came pretty quickly, but they sped by the shooter as he was hunkered down between cars in the parking lot. And a teacher must have noticed this too, because video seems to show that she dialed 911 to report it. Within 4 minutes of entering the classroom, in which he barricaded himself, he fired over 100 rounds, killing all 19 children and 2 teachers in those adjoining rooms. According to a firefighter, it took over an hour for police to enter that classroom from the time that Ramos arrived, as they made the poor decision from going from an active shooter status to just someone who had barricaded himself in a room. There's just no viable excuse for that. Ramos's grandmother took care of him, so it's unclear why he would shoot her. He was described as a loner with very few friends, apparently bullied quite a bit. Apparently he got into a number of fights at school as well. In recent days, he had stopped attending school and even sent a classmate a photo of the rifles that he had just purchased. There were clues left on social media as to his intentions. He had private messaged a stranger that he'd never met, telling her that he had a secret and he was going to, but never finished that thought. He seemed to find friends only online. A spokesman for Meta, Facebook's parent company, said the gunman's private one-to-one messages were discovered after the shooting. Governor Greg Abbott said that in the first of 3 messages, about 30 minutes before the school shooting, Ramos wrote, "I'm going to shoot my grandmother." Shortly after that, he wrote, "I shot my grandmother." And finally, "I'm going to shoot an elementary school." In other group messages on Instagram from February, there was talk of Ramos being a school shooter, Department of Public Safety Director Stephen McGraw has said. In March, there were more group chats on Instagram about Ramos buying a gun. McGraw said that last year Ramos had asked his sister to buy him a gun, but she flatly refused. So what we're seeing is a pattern of behavior. A loner, a guy with no friends, a guy who was hinted at doing strange things and wanting a gun. He lives with his grandmother. So, where were the parents? And then this social media trove is particularly interesting, because once he said he was going to shoot his grandmother, and then that he had indeed shot his grandmother, now you have the confession of a crime. I'd like to know why Facebook and its sister media Instagram didn't flag these. I say this because they have made such a huge stink about misinformation that you can't even post certain things or content because they have censored conservatives so heavily. But when a teenager admits he's about to kill and then admits he did kill, where does that fall in their so-called safe environment that they want to create? They claim to be anti-bully, and maybe the kid was bullied a lot. But what do you do when that person becomes a bully with an AR-15? It's like we've gone out of our way to protect the weak, but then the weak decide to take matters into their own hands. There is no one simple answer to this, but I want to be diligent in where breakdowns happen that could have potentially, and I only say potentially, prevented this tragedy, and where we can create safeguards going forward. So let's go step by step. You have an 18-year-old who has been bullied, probably highly insecure. Like many teenagers, he had endured the pandemic and lockdowns that have taxed all of us mentally. But we aren't sure why his grandmother was having to raise him. Problem number one, no parental mentorship. This is a common problem today. A lack of a strong mother and father will set a kid up for disaster. So the number one stumbling block is the lack of proper parenting. Number two, whatever school system he was in seems to have failed him in terms of the school resources or guidance counseling. If he was being bullied and showed loner, erratic behavior, that could have been addressed. And perhaps it was, but not diligently enough. So that's an internal flaw in our schools. They can't be parents, but they can provide resources and alert parents to problems. Next, the kid showed some signs of mental instability in his social media, especially befriending strangers that he'd never met, rather than anyone in his own town. He indicated to them that he was a bit off, but kids don't always notice or report strange behavior. And it's become kind of a stigma where people don't report others for fear of being called out. They'll be called a racist, a bigot, a Karen, a homophobe, you name it. Next, he asked his sister for money for the guns, and she refused. So she did not intercede when it seemed he was already perhaps in a conspiratorial phase. She did not help him seek any help. Then he gets the money somehow, some way, and we're not sure of how just yet. But he goes not to a gun show, but a federally authorized dealer to purchase these rifles, just after his 18th birthday. This means that he had to fill out the application and go through the proper checks. Maybe, just maybe, he cleared all of these without any problem. Maybe it set off no red flags. He loads up on ammo and tactical vest, which signals something is about to happen. He then shoots his grandmother and then tells people on social media he's going to do it, and then he admits that he did it. This is where I have an issue with social media companies not stepping in. Yes, we all should have a reasonable expectation of privacy. But as we know, some of these shooters like to make martyrs of themselves, and they live stream their evil or even talk about it openly long before they do it. Sometimes there are even manifestos. In this case, he said exactly what he was going to do, and he did it.